So we have these three different important variables: fertility, mortality, and migration. And as a result of these, we get what's called population dynamics. The state of a given region, the state of a given city, the state of a given country, the state of a given society at any time can be growing, can be shrinking, can be shifting in terms of what it looks like, etc., based on these three principles. And so sociologists first kind of simplistically study population dynamics in terms of population growth. Is a country, is a city, is a society growing or shrinking? Do we have population growth? Or on the other hand, do we have population shrinkage? You'll read about in your book. And it's a pretty easy way to discover whether or not we have population growth or population shrinkage. It's known as the population growth equation. To calculate the growth rate of a population, you simply take the number of migrants for a country, you add the number of births for that country, and you subtract the number of deaths for that country, and divide it by the current population. So if we took this hypothetical current population of 3,000 people, and in this hypothetical population, we had 11 people move in, 43 people be born, and 24 people die, we would get a population growth rate of 0.01, or a 1% population growth rate. And in fact, if we look at the present day modern United States, this is the typical growth rate for our population. If we look at the 2010 census, we had roughly 300 million people. We had roughly 4.3 million births, 2.4 million deaths, and 1.1 million immigrants. And we have a positive growth rate as a result. One of the reasons why we have a positive growth rate is actually because of our migrants. We would either have a neutral or a slightly shrinking population if we didn't have people immigrating into the United States. And this is kind of characteristic of most modern societies. They have shrinking populations rather than growing populations. And in fact, their migrants are what keep their populations growing. So if we look at the growth rate of the population of Earth, we actually see a really kind of interesting trend here. It took from the beginning of human history all the way to 1800 to get to 1 billion people on Earth. It only took about 120 more years to get to 2 billion, and we're here in present day around 7 billion. Nearly, less than 100 years later. So we have this interesting growth rate. We have nearly an exponential growth rate in terms of population. And there's a lot to be said when we look at the population growth rate of the world. Is there going to be problems as a result of this ever-increasing number of people on the planet? Especially on a planet that is limited in terms of its resources. Right? Limited in terms of its resources. We only have enough food, or enough fuel, or enough land, enough water for so many people. And in fact, this is the hypothesis of a guy named Thomas Malthus. He was an English economist who looked at this growth rate around the turn of the 20th century and worried that the population was actually going to outstrip the world's food supply. That our growth rate would be such that there would be not enough food to go around. And in fact, if there's not enough food, there's famine, there's disease, there's war, and it's not a pretty place. So Malthus' prediction about population growth was a prediction of doom. We're growing faster than we can support ourselves or sustain ourselves. We are at an unsustainable pace of population growth. And in fact, there's a group of people known as the new Malthusiasts that say, in fact, Thomas Malthus is correct. He was actually incorrect about the prediction of how fast the population would grow. And in fact, it's growing faster than he predicted. And thus, there's not going to be enough food or water or land to feed this rapidly growing population. And as a result, we're going to have war, we're going to have famine, we're going to have disease, and it's not going to be a pretty place to live. Aside from the prediction of doom from Malthus and the new Malthusians, there's actually a group of demographers that say Malthus and his ilk are actually wrong. That what we're seeing here is known as a demographic transition. A demographic transition. That over the past 200 years that we've seen this huge increase in population growth, we've seen a change from an agricultural-based economy worldwide to an industrialized-based economy worldwide. And in fact, countries that have industrialized follow an interesting curve, an interesting growth curve. First, in stage 1, birth and death rates are balanced. Population is not growing. Then, in stage 2, while the country industrializes, births outstrip the number of deaths. The fertility rate stays high, and the death rate drops. New technologies, better health care, newer social systems drop that death rate, but the birth rate still stays high. Eventually, people learn that having a lot of children is not a good thing. In an industrialized economy, they're quite expensive, and the birth rate drops. And it actually drops below the number of death rate in stage 4, and the population begins to shrink. So if we look at the number of industrialized nations in the world, out of 200 nations, 65 of the most industrialized countries are actually shrinking in population rather than growing. The United States, which is an industrialized population, would be shrinking if it wasn't for the fact that we have such a robust migration rate. And in fact, shrinking populations have their problems, just as growing populations have their problems. Shrinking populations means that there is not enough people to support the economy. There are not enough people to support the government. There is not enough people to support the other institutions within that social system. And those institutions crumble. And those institutions have problems as a result of not having enough people to support them. So in the United States, in a lot of ways, we're blessed by having a robust migrant population because we're keeping our growth rate slightly above 0, and we are continually able to replenish the people that are dying off and the lack of people having children. The lack of people having children. So this is just an illustration of population dynamics. So what the expectation is that by around 2100, we will have worldwide a shrinking population rather than a growing population. The population is expected to grow up through 2060. It will level off for a period of time, and then it will begin to shrink. And that is what the anti-Malthusians propose, based on the evidence that they see in industrialized countries. So, with that being said, we'll talk about urbanization on Wednesday, and then we'll start our video. You all take care.